Agatha Raisin and Mrs. Bloxby's unforgivable sin. Good evening and welcome, dear friends. At dawn, a soft knock at the vicarage reveals a trembling stranger with a letter Mrs. Bloxby dares not show Agatha. By noon, whispers stir through Carsley. The vicar has vanished, and Agatha senses a secret even gentle Mrs. Bloxby cannot confess. Before Agatha steps into today's mystery, we love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It warms our hearts knowing how far Agatha's little adventures travel. Your comments truly keep this cozy corner alive. And if these stories bring you comfort, do subscribe so you never miss a moment. So let's begin. Chapter 1. The Letter That Shouldn't Exist. The knock came just as the sun lifted over Carsley's thatched rooftops, soft enough that Mrs. Bloxby almost wondered if she'd imagined it. She wiped her hands on her apron, crossed the small hallway, and opened the front door with her usual gentle smile. Standing on the step was a young woman she did not recognize, thin, pale, and trembling as though she'd run the entire length of the village. Her eyes darted past Mrs. Bloxby's shoulder, scanning the quiet vicarage as if expecting someone to appear behind her at any moment. Mrs. Bloxby greeted her warmly, but the young woman didn't respond. She thrust forward a sealed envelope, her hand shaking so much the edges fluttered. "For you," she whispered. Her voice carried a sharp edge of fear that struck Mrs. Bloxby like a sudden cold breeze. Before she could ask any questions, the young woman stepped back, nearly tripping over the uneven path, and hurried away with quick, unsteady strides. She didn't look back, disappearing down the lane between hedges still wet with dew. Puzzled and unsettled, Mrs. Bloxby closed the door slowly, turning the envelope over in her hands. It was addressed to her in neat handwriting she didn't recognize. Something about the weight of it, or perhaps the urgency the young stranger carried, made her palms grow damp. She set the envelope briefly on the entry table, intending to take a moment to steady herself before opening it, but she barely took 2 steps toward the kitchen before the vicar's footsteps approached from upstairs. "What was that, dear?" he called cheerfully. Mrs. Bloxby spun around and swiftly slid the letter beneath a stack of charity newsletters. "Oh, just someone checking on the charity shop hours," she replied with practiced ease. Her voice trembled only slightly, and she prayed he wouldn't notice. The vicar, in his mild morning cheer, didn't pause long enough to detect anything amiss. He simply kissed her forehead, muttered something about preparing his sermon notes, and wandered into his study. She watched him go, heart thudding far harder than usual. She glanced back at the hidden envelope. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, she didn't want him to see it, not until she understood what it meant, and something in her chest whispered that understanding it might hurt. Hours slipped by in slow, uneasy motions. She kept busy with her morning tasks, though the letter's presence felt like a quiet weight pressing into the house. By late morning, when Agatha Raisin appeared at the vicarage gate with her brisk stride and familiar air of confidence, Mrs. Bloxby was almost relieved for the distraction. Agatha let herself in with her usual lack of ceremony. "I swear the entire village has decided to interrupt me this morning," she announced, brushing a stray blonde hair from her forehead. "Thought I'd escape before someone else tried to sell me raffle tickets." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she took in Mrs. Bloxby's forced smile. "You look pale," she said, softening. "Have you been sleeping properly?" Mrs. Bloxby insisted everything was fine. She offered Agatha tea, made polite conversation, complimented her coat, but every gesture carried a faint stiffness. Agatha watched her carefully, noticing the way her hands lingered near the entry table but never touched the stack of newsletters. When a light draft rustled the papers, Agatha glimpsed something underneath, the corner of an envelope, the edge singed as if it had been too close to flame. She didn't remark on it, though the sight sharpened her curiosity like a pinprick. Instead, she reached for her mug and said something lightly teasing about the vicar's habit of losing his own sermon notes. Mrs. Bloxby managed to laugh, but her gaze flickered toward the doorway as if checking whether someone else might overhear. When Agatha finally stood to leave, the sense of unease clung to her. She stepped out into the crisp morning air, pausing at the gate. The village lay peaceful around her, birds chattering, chimneys releasing faint curls of wood smoke, cottages basking in the calm. Yet something inside the vicarage hummed with secrecy. Agatha glanced back once more, spotting Mrs. Blocksby through the window, standing still in the hallway with one hand resting over the newsletters. The gesture was small, almost tender, but heavy with meaning. Agatha walked away slowly, her instincts stirring. Whatever was in that envelope had unsettled her friend deeply, and she doubted Mrs. Blocksby would be able to hide it long. Not from her, not from anyone. Something had arrived at the vicarage that did not belong in Carsley's peaceful morning, and Agatha felt the first quiet pull of a mystery beginning to unfurl. Agatha marched briskly up the garden path toward her cottage, the familiar scent of damp earth and rosemary brushing past her as she unlocked the door. Normally, the comfort of home settled her nerves immediately, but today a restless energy followed her inside. She set her handbag on the table a little too forcefully, earning a startled flutter from her cat, Hodge. He stared accusingly before leaping onto the windowsill with a disdainful flick of his tail. "Oh, don't start," Agatha muttered, rubbing her temples. She paced the small sitting room, trying to dismiss the nagging sensation tugging at her thoughts. Mrs. Blocksby had smiled, had poured tea, had behaved almost normally, but there had been something brittle beneath her calm exterior, a strain around the eyes, a slight tremor in the hands, a stiffness in her posture. Agatha was no stranger to nerves, but Mrs. Blocksby's unease didn't feel like everyday worry. It felt like fear. She sank into the armchair and tried to reason with herself. Perhaps the poor woman was simply overworked. The vicar could be absent-minded to the point of chaos, after all. But the memory of the half-hidden envelope flickered in her mind again. The corner had been faintly scorched, as if it had briefly kissed a flame, and Mrs. Blocksby had guarded it, even while pretending not to. Agatha didn't like mysteries that involved her closest friend. They pressed too firmly against her protective instincts. Her phone rang abruptly, jarring the quiet cottage. She fished it out of her pocket. Charles's name flashed across the screen. With a resigned sigh, she answered. "Agatha, darling!" Charles's voice oozed its usual mix of charm and mischief. "I'm coming to Carsley this evening. Thought I'd grace you with my presence. Try to contain your excitement." She rolled her eyes, though her lips twitched. "If you're expecting a brass band, you'll be disappointed." "Oh, I never expect anything less than adoration." He paused. "You sound distracted. Have you taken up knitting? That would certainly explain the boredom in your tone." Agatha's gaze drifted to the fireplace mantel, replaying the images from the vicarage. The startled young woman backing away, the look in Mrs. Blocksby's eyes, the envelope tucked beneath the newsletters as though hiding a dangerous secret. "I'm not bored," she said absently. "Which means you're worrying about something," Charles countered. "Do tell. I can offer commentary, unsolicited advice, or mild ridicule." Under normal circumstances, she might have snapped back, but today her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't mention the letter, not without understanding it first. "It's nothing," she said, "just village nonsense." "That phrase usually precedes you charging off into trouble." "I don't charge," Agatha said crisply. "I investigate." "Precisely my point." She ended the call before he could add another smug observation. The phone landed on the cushion beside her. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, letting the morning replay in her head with sharper clarity. The fleeting glimpse of the young woman's retreat lingered most of all. The frantic steps, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. Whoever she was, she hadn't simply delivered a message. She had fled. Agatha stood abruptly. She told herself she was only going to make a cup of tea, but her movements were too sharp, her mind too busy. She needed to know what had frightened both messenger and recipient. A discreet inquiry at the shop, perhaps. Someone must have seen the girl before she reached the vicarage. Hours later,
as dusk slipped quietly into Carsley. The atmosphere inside the vicarage shifted. Mrs. Blocksby sat alone in her sitting room, the envelope placed carefully on her lap. She had waited all day, her thoughts twisting into tighter knots, fear mingled with guilt she'd hoped never to feel again. Her fingers hovered over the flap before finally breaking the seal. The paper inside crackled softly as she unfolded it. Whatever she read drained the warmth from her face. Her breath caught, her hand gripping the letter until it crumpled slightly at the edges. She whispered a plea, soft, choked, almost prayer-like. No one was there to hear it, but the tremor in her hands told a story powerful enough to shake the peace of Carsley long before a single word was spoken aloud.
Chapter 2. The Vicar Vanishes. Agatha was halfway through her first cup of coffee, burnt, far too strong and comfortingly familiar, when the telephone rang with a shrill insistence that made her wince. She considered letting the machine take it. Only two kinds of people called before 9 in Carsley, those selling dubious roof repairs and those bringing trouble. But the display flashed Blocksby Residence, and Agatha's irritation instantly softened. Mrs. Blocksby never phoned this early unless something was truly wrong. "Agatha," came the vicar's wife's voice, thin and strained, as though pulled taut. I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but could you possibly come over? It's about my husband." Agatha's spine straightened. "Is he ill?" "No." A pause. "He's gone." "Gone where?" Another pause. "I don't know." That was all it took. Within 10 minutes, Agatha was striding up the vicarage path, coat flapping behind her like a crimson battle flag. Frost glittered on the hedges, and an unsettled quiet hung in the winter garden. Too still, too watchful. Mrs. Blocksby opened the door before Agatha could knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though her smile tried to be its usual gentle balm. "Thank you for coming. I must be overreacting. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation." "If there were," Agatha said, stepping inside, "you wouldn't be wringing your hands like a Regency heroine." Mrs. Blocksby dropped her gaze. "He wasn't himself last night. Distracted. He went to his study after supper. When I woke this morning, he hadn't returned to bed." Agatha followed her down the hall. The vicar's door stood half open, and the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it. That subtle wrongness, like walking into a room that had been arguing with itself. The desk lamp still burned under the faint gray wash of morning. Papers lay scattered across the floor. An overturned mug stained the rug. And the vicar's well-worn Bible rested askew, a page partly torn from its binding. The window was unlatched, unusual for a man who scolded parishioners about drafts with pastoral zeal. Agatha crouched by the desk. "This doesn't look like a man stepping out for a morning stroll." "No," Mrs. Blocksby whispered, twisting a handkerchief. "But please, Agatha, do be gentle. I don't want rumors starting. People panic so easily. You called me, not the Women's Institute Knitting Circle. You knew I'd look." Mrs. Blocksby said nothing, only drifted toward the desk with a kind of nervous gravity. She hovered near the top drawer. Too near, too consciously. Agatha noticed at once. The woman seldom lied, but she could certainly hide. "What's in there?" Agatha asked casually. "Nothing important." Far too quick. "Just receipts and correspondence." The vicar's neat handwriting peeked from underneath the half-open drawer, the corner of a notebook barely visible. Before Agatha could press further, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the house. Agatha strode to the front window, just as a familiar police vehicle pulled up. Bill Wong stepped out, jacket zipped to his chin, expression set in that careful, professional calm he wore when he was worried. "You phoned him too?" Agatha asked as Bill entered the study. "Mrs. Blocksby rang the station," he confirmed, giving the room a slow inspection. "We treat disappearances seriously.
especially when the timeline's unclear. Agatha bristled. You're implying he wandered off? I'm implying nothing yet. He knelt by the spilled papers. This wasn't an accidental mess. Mrs. Blocksby clasped her hands tightly. Please, both of you, just find him. And promise me, Agatha, don't pry into things that aren't yours. Which, of course, ensured that she absolutely would. Agatha met Bill's eyes over Mrs. Blocksby's bowed head. A missing vicar, a ransacked study, a wife hiding something. Carsley's quiet morning had just shifted into mystery.
Carsley was a village where nothing ever truly vanished. Not gossip, not laundry day, and certainly not the vicar. At least that was the theory Agatha clung to, as she and Bill set out from the vicarage, leaving behind a pale and trembling Mrs. Blocksby, who insisted she had evening prayer to prepare, despite her voice fluttering like a trapped sparrow. Agatha didn't believe it for a heartbeat. Evening prayer could be postponed. Husbands could not. We start central, Bill said, striding toward the green. Someone must have seen him yesterday. Or someone wants us to think they didn't, Agatha muttered. Their first stop was the post office, the social nerve center of Carsley. Mrs. Mason, who ran the place with imperial briskness, looked up from sorting envelopes when they entered. If you're asking about the vicar, she said before either could speak, I haven't seen him since yesterday morning. He came to collect some parcels for the church fete. Anything unusual? Agatha asked. Mrs. Mason pursed her lips. Just this. She produced a scrap of paper from behind the counter, a torn page from a hymn book, creased and smudged. I meant to give it back to him, but he was gone before I noticed. Agatha took the fragment. Lead kindly light. A hymn about guidance through darkness. Dramatic, almost too apt. She caught Bill's eye. He shrugged, but she saw the flicker of concern. Next came the bank kiosk, where the clerk, a mild-mannered man named Leonard with a fondness for bow ties, frowned at Bill's badge before leaning in. It's probably nothing, Leonard whispered, but the vicar withdrew a rather odd amount yesterday, £240, in cash. Agatha's eyebrows climbed. That's not his style. He runs the church fund with an iron fist. Leonard nodded. Exactly. He always files paperwork to the penny. Yesterday, though, he seemed distracted, hands trembling. I asked if everything was all right, and he just said he had urgent parish business. Agatha felt a prickle of unease. Urgent business rarely involved crumpled hymn book pages or secretive withdrawals. They crossed the green toward the shops, where a pair of dog walkers paused mid-gossip to wave them over. The taller of the two, Mrs. Hardy, lowered her voice conspiratorially. We saw someone near the vicarage last night, she said. A young woman, didn't recognize her. Dark coat, messenger bag, looked anxious. Could she have been delivering something? Agatha asked, pulse quickening. Could have, Mrs. Hardy replied. She spoke to the vicar at his gate. Then they walked off toward the footpath. Agatha exchanged a sharp glance with Bill. The messenger, the same young woman who delivered the mysterious letter to Agatha, she was sure of it. That quiet tension in the girl's posture, that hurried way she'd vanished down the lane afterward, it all aligned too neatly. Bill scribbled notes. Which direction exactly? Mrs. Hardy pointed toward the trees edging the village. The woodland path, the one that loops past the old mill. When they left the women behind, Agatha exhaled slowly. You're thinking what I'm thinking. That the letter and his disappearance are connected, most likely. Agatha kicked at a pebble. Mrs. Blocksby swore the letter was nothing, but she's rattled, and she's hiding something. She's scared, Bill corrected gently. People hide the most when they're scared. They followed the footpath until the village thinned and the air grew colder. Birds scattered from the hedgerows at their approach. Halfway toward the mill, a gardener trimming brambles called out to them. You looking for Reverend Blocksby? Saw him yesterday afternoon. He wasn't alone. Agatha stepped forward. With a young woman? The gardener nodded. Aye, pretty thing. Looked worried. They headed into the woods. Agatha's breath caught. The messenger girl again, appearing at the start of every thread. And now she was the last person seen with the missing vicar.
Chapter 3. Shadows from Mrs. Blocksby's Past. Agatha arrived at the vicarage with a basket of scones she'd purchased in a rush from the bakery, hoping the gesture would soften whatever conversation lay ahead. The morning sun cast warm, friendly light across the garden, but the house itself felt subdued, as though holding its breath. She knocked once and let herself in, calling Mrs. Blocksby's name gently. No response. Only after Agatha stepped into the hallway did the vicar's wife emerge from the kitchen, hands clasped too tightly to seem casual. "Agatha, you didn't have to come," she began, though her voice lacked conviction. "Don't be daft," Agatha replied, setting the basket on the counter. "Your husband is missing, and you look like you've slept in a chair. I'm here as your friend." Mrs. Blocksby's polite smile trembled. Agatha moved closer, lowering her voice. "Bill and I found a few things yesterday. Small things, but odd. And I keep thinking there's something you want to tell me." For a moment, Mrs. Blocksby didn't answer. She looked toward the study door, then at her own hands, as if searching for courage. "Agatha, there is something. I should have told you from the start. The letter." A sharp knock jolted them both. Mrs. Blocksby flinched, visibly startled. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Expecting someone?" "No," Mrs. Blocksby whispered, but the word held a defeated sigh. Agatha opened the door to find two church volunteers, Mrs. Henley and Mr. Pratt, holding boxes of donated clothing. Mrs. Henley beamed warmly, oblivious to the tension inside. "We thought we'd help organize the charity room," she chirped. "You must be overwhelmed with the vicar away." Mrs. Blocksby recovered her composure like someone slipping on a familiar mask. "Thank you. Yes, of course. Come in." Agatha watched her friend bustle them toward the back of the house, voice steady but hollow. She waited until the group disappeared down the corridor before wandering toward the study. The room still carried the faint disarray from the vicar's departure. Papers on the floor, a chair askew, a pen uncapped on the desk. It all felt too abrupt to be accidental. She reached for a stack of parish papers, intending only to glance through them. But when she lifted the top sheet, something slid loose beneath. A photograph, old enough for the edges to have faded. Agatha caught it before it drifted to the floor. 3 young women stood side by side, dressed sensibly, but with an unmistakable air of guarded wariness. One of them, centered, steady, and unmistakable, was Mrs. Blocksby in her 20s, her expression solemn yet resilient. The other 2 women bore a striking familiarity she couldn't immediately place. The background appeared to be a modest brick building with a small sign she couldn't read. Agatha's brows knit in curiosity. She traced a finger along the corner of the photograph. Mrs. Blocksby had never mentioned close friends from her youth, nor had she spoken of any past that seemed fraught. The Mrs. Blocksby she knew was gentle, steadfast, an anchor in the village. But the woman in the photograph looked like she carried storms no one had ever asked about. Before she could study further, Mrs. Blocksby's voice cut through the silence. "Agatha!" Agatha turned as Mrs. Blocksby hurried into the room, face draining of color when she saw what Agatha held. She snatched the photo with trembling fingers. "That's nothing. Just an old memory. Irrelevant." "Mrs. Blocksby," Agatha said softly, "your husband is missing. There was a letter. Now this. You're frightened, and I can see why. Please, trust me." Mrs. Blocksby pressed the photograph to her chest, eyes shining with unspoken fear. For a moment, it seemed she might finally share the truth. Her lips parted. A breath trembled. But the volunteers called from the hallway, asking where to place the donation boxes. The moment shattered. Mrs. Blocksby retreated behind her practiced calm. "Later, Agatha. Not now." Agatha stood alone in the study as the house settled around them, the air heavy with secrets that refused to surface. Outside, Carsley bustled with its usual cheer, yet the village felt shadowed, as though watching,
waiting and quietly urging her onward.
Agatha left the vicarage with more questions than she cared to admit. The photograph lingered in her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't quite catch. Mrs. Blocksby's haunted reaction had sealed one thing. Whatever past she shared with those two women, it mattered now. And Agatha Raisin, once a PR bulldog and still a woman incapable of letting a puzzle lie, intended to unravel it. She drove into Carsley, the familiar stone cottages offering their usual comfort, yet her mind wouldn't settle. Who were the other women? Why hide such an ordinary-looking photograph? She needed someone who remembered the village as it had been decades ago, someone with a memory as sharp as a tack and twice as nosy. That led to one person, Miss Wilmot, a former parishioner who had retired to her tiny whitewashed cottage near the edge of the lane. Miss Wilmot answered the door wearing a knitted shawl and an expression that managed to be both surprised and pleased. "Agatha Raisin! It's been an age! Come in, dear, come in." Agatha stepped inside, careful not to trip over the crocheted footstool that seemed to have migrated to the middle of the rug. "Sorry for dropping in unannounced. I had some questions about the village, going back a few decades." "That sounds serious," Miss Wilmot said, bustling to make tea. "You're not here about the vicar's disappearance, are you?" Agatha hesitated, in a roundabout way. When the tea was poured, she pulled out a rough sketch she'd made from memory, 3 women standing shoulder to shoulder. "Do you remember a group of young women like these?" Miss Wilmot's eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. "My word, the Morning Star girls!" Agatha felt her pulse quicken. "Who were they?" "Oh, they were lovely," Miss Wilmot said, leaning back as if unlocking a long-closed cabinet of memories. "They were a little charity circle run out of the parish hall. They helped troubled girls, those with difficult homes or nowhere to go. This was long before Mrs. Blocksby married the vicar, mind you. She was just Miss Patterson then." Agatha absorbed the name. So Mrs. Blocksby did have a past she'd never spoken of. "What happened to the group?" Miss Wilmot stirred her tea, frowning. "It ended suddenly. Quite a shock. There was a scandal, you see. One of the girls disappeared. A runaway. Barely 16. Agatha leaned forward. "Do you remember her name?" "No, or perhaps it was Margaret? Megan, something with an M? Poor thing. Some said she ran off with a young man. Others thought she'd gone back to a bad family situation." Miss Wilmot sighed. "But the Morning Star Society stopped meeting right after. The girls they helped were quietly dispersed elsewhere." "And the women?" Agatha asked. "Mrs. Blocksby and the others?" "They drifted apart. It was all hush-hush. But I always thought Miss Patterson took it the hardest. She'd been mentoring the runaway girl closely. Felt responsible." Miss Wilmot's gaze sharpened. "Why does this interest you now?" Agatha folded away the sketch. "A young woman came to the vicarage recently. She delivered a letter to Mrs. Blocksby. She looked frightened and oddly familiar. I can't explain it, but something tells me she's connected." Miss Wilmot pursed her lips. "If she resembled the runaway, perhaps she's her daughter. Time does that, brings the past knocking, even when we pray it won't." The idea chilled Agatha more than she liked. And if that's true, then whatever happened back then, it isn't finished. Miss Wilmot nodded gravely. "Secrets have long shadows, my dear." Agatha thanked her and stepped back out into the fresh air. The sun shone warmly, but she felt none of its comfort. The village looked unchanged, peaceful, ordinary, but the past was stirring beneath its quiet surface. A runaway girl, a broken society, a frightened messenger. Mrs. Blocksby's trembling hands made new sense. As Agatha walked toward her car, a thought struck her with the clarity of a bell. If the young messenger truly carried the blood of the runaway girl, then her appearance wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning, and the vicar's disappearance might be tangled in secrets far older and far darker than Agatha had ever imagined. Chapter 4. A Sin Spoken Aloud. Agatha returned to the vicarage that afternoon with a firm, steady purpose. She had tried to give Mrs. Blocksby space, hoping her friend would volunteer the truth on her own, but the weight of the missing vicar, the letter, and the resurfaced past pressed too hard. Agatha could no longer ignore the signs. Mrs. Blocksby was unraveling quietly, thread by thread. The vicarage door opened before Agatha even reached it. Mrs. Blocksby stood there, her face pale beneath the soft glow of the hallway. Her usual calm seemed stretched thin, as though the gentlest touch might shatter it completely. "Agatha," she whispered, stepping aside, "come in." Agatha entered without a word, letting the silence settle between them. The house felt heavier than before. No volunteers bustling around, no kettle whistling, just an oppressive stillness. Mrs. Blocksby led her into the sitting room and closed the door behind them. "I can't pretend any longer," she murmured, sinking into the armchair. "It's all catching up with me." Agatha sat opposite her, hands folded gently in her lap. "Then tell me, whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." For a long moment, Mrs. Blocksby simply stared at the window, her gaze unfocused. "Do you remember the Morning Star Society?" she asked softly. Agatha nodded. "I visited Miss Wilmot. She told me about the runaway girl." A tremor passed through her shoulders. "Her name was Mara. Bright, stubborn, terrified of her home life. She came to us for help. To me, specifically. She trusted me." She closed her eyes, recalling the memory with painful clarity. "But she wasn't just running from a cruel household. She was running from someone connected to the village." "Who?" "My husband." Agatha froze, not with disbelief, but with shock for her friend. "The vicar?" "Not as you think," Mrs. Blocksby said quickly. He wasn't harming her, but he discovered something she'd done in desperation. She stole money from the church fund. Not for herself, but to escape. He insisted on reporting it, said it wasn't his place to hide wrongdoing. Mara begged me for protection. She said going back home would destroy her. Her voice broke. So I helped her flee." Agatha sat back slowly, letting the pieces shuffle into place. "You helped her escape the village, against the vicar's orders." "Yes." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes glistened. "I drove her out one night, left her at a shelter 2 counties over. I thought she would build a new life, but we heard she died months later, a fall from a train platform. They said it was accidental, but some whispers suggested otherwise." Agatha felt her chest tighten. "And you've carried that alone?" Mrs. Blocksby wiped at her cheek. "I believed I had saved her from one danger only to deliver her into another. I never forgave myself." She reached into her pocket, slowly unfolding the letter. "Now her daughter has returned. She believes Mara didn't simply fall. She thinks she was followed. She thinks—" her voice faltered before she forced the words out. "She thinks the vicar betrayed her mother." Agatha exhaled sharply. That he reported her, or something more? The letter implies he knew Mara was still in danger even after she left, that he might have told someone where she'd gone. Mrs. Blocksby stared at her hands, trembling. "I don't know if it's true, but if it is, then I sent Mara into harm's way, and now her daughter wants justice." Agatha shook her head gently. "No, she wants answers. That's different." She reached out, placing her hand over Mrs. Blocksby's. "And we'll find them, together. But you mustn't crumble alone under this." Mrs. Blocksby finally met her gaze, a fragile hope flickering through the fear. "Agatha, I'm terrified, not just for what happened to Mara, but for what this means for my husband, and why he's vanished now." Agatha stood, her jaw tightening with resolve. "Then we start from the beginning. No more secrets. Not from me." For the first time in days, Mrs. Blocksby nodded without hesitation.
Mrs. Blocksby hesitated only a moment before handing Agatha the letter. Her fingers lingered on the folded paper, as though releasing it would strip away her last layer of protection. Agatha received it gently, aware she was touching the very object that had upended her friend's world. The envelope was creased, soft around the edges from being held too many times. A faint scent of lavender clung to it, likely from the messenger, not Mrs. Blocksby. Agatha unfolded the pages. The ink was dark, the handwriting careful but uneven, as if written in strong emotion rather than steady conviction. "You know what you did. You let him ruin her life, and then you let her die. He will tell the truth, or I will drag it from him myself. If you truly cared for her, you will not stand in my way." Agatha read the rest silently, her eyes narrowing at each line. The accusations were brutal, direct, but something about them struck her as off. They carried fury, yes, but Also desperation. There were no specific details, no dates, no documented actions, no witness names. Only raw pain, shaped into blame. She lowered the letter slowly. "This isn't evidence," she murmured. "It's emotion, and emotion can twist memory." Mrs. Blocksby pressed a hand to her chest. "But the accusations are written by someone grieving a mother they never truly knew," Agatha interrupted gently. "You told me yourself Mara was frightened, confused, and alone. Her daughter must have grown up with stories and shadows. That kind of history can make the past look like a monster." Mrs. Blocksby looked unconvinced. "But it says my husband betrayed her, that he told someone where she had gone." "The vicar is stubborn, rigid, annoyingly righteous sometimes. But a traitor? A man who would harm a girl in danger? I don't believe it. And neither do you. Not truly." Mrs. Blocksby's gaze wavered. "He did insist on reporting her theft, and we argued, but he wanted to follow the rules, not hurt her." Agatha folded the letter again, careful and slow. "Then perhaps this isn't about Mara at all. Perhaps someone is using her memory to manipulate you, or the vicar, or both." Mrs. Blocksby's breath hitched. "But why would he run away? Why disappear?" "That, I admit, is the part that troubles me." She stood and crossed to the window, watching the quiet lane outside. The autumn breeze stirred the leaves along the curb, scattering them like restless gauts. "He must have received something too, a message, a threat." She turned back. "Or he left because he thought staying would endanger you." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes widened at the possibility. "He would do that. He always protected me, even when I didn't ask." Agatha returned to her chair, determination settling across her features. "Then we have to find him before this young woman does. We don't know what she's capable of. Pain makes people unpredictable." Mrs. Blocksby nodded, though her hands trembled again. "Agatha, if there is a grain of truth in her accusation, then No." Agatha's tone softened but remained firm. "You don't get to carry the weight of something without proof. Not again. You helped Mara because she trusted you. You acted with compassion. If someone twisted that into harm, then we uncover who and why." A frontal calm began to settle over Mrs. Blocksby's face. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Agatha smiled faintly. "Probably still be standing in the sitting room, wringing your hands and refusing to tell anyone what's wrong." That earned the smallest laugh, a breathy, weary sound, but a laugh nonetheless. Agatha slipped the letter into her handbag. "We'll start fresh. We look for the vicar, we gather facts, we ignore accusations until they're supported by more than ink and fear." Mrs. Blocksby rose to her feet, a new steadiness in her posture. "Then I'll do whatever you need, whatever helps." Agatha touched her arm. "Good, because from here on we face this together." And with that quiet, resolute promise, the two women stepped out of the sitting room, not free of fear, but united against it.
Chapter 5. The Daughter's Hunt. Agatha navigated Carsley's narrow lanes with practiced caution, her mind replaying every detail from the previous encounters. The village seemed smaller than ever, the cottages leaning quietly toward each other, as if conspiring to keep secrets. She had a name now, Lena, and a vague sense of her path through the village. She also had a hunch that the girl's fiery temperament concealed far more fear than bravado. The baker, Mr. Clifton, remembered seeing a young woman in a dark coat dart toward the eastern lane, like she had the devil on her heels, he'd said. Agatha followed that direction, slowing her pace at each shadow, each rustle of leaves. Her instincts, fine-tuned after countless small investigations, told her Lena had a pattern, a route familiar enough to avoid unwanted attention. Finally, she spotted her, crouched behind the low hedge of an abandoned cottage near the edge of town, fidgeting with a folded piece of paper. The girl looked up as Agatha approached, eyes sharp, guarded, and undeniably exhausted. Agatha raised a hand in greeting. "Lena?" she asked softly. The girl blinked, then jumped to her feet. "Who wants to know?" "I do," Agatha replied, stepping closer. "Agatha Raisin. I know who you are and why you've come to Carsley. I'm not here to stop you, only to understand." Lena's eyes narrowed, flicking to the surrounding street. "And if I don't want to talk?" "You might be surprised," Agatha said, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's safer with me than alone." After a tense pause, Lena exhaled sharply. "I'm listening." Agatha gestured toward a bench nearby. "Sit.
Tell me your story, slowly." The girl hesitated, then lowered herself carefully. "My mother, she fled Carsley years ago. Something unforgivable happened at the vicarage. I don't know all the details. She never told me, but she kept saying, 'He knew, and did nothing.' I've been trying to find answers ever since." Agatha noted the rhythm of the words, the sharp breaks where emotion overwhelmed fact. She didn't interrupt, only let Lena spill her story. Yet already small inconsistencies surfaced. How could Lena know so many details without having been told? Why did she claim knowledge her mother might have deliberately withheld? And why did her anger mingle with a strange, almost hopeful expectation? Lena's gaze hardened. "I have to confront him. If he doesn't confess, I'll expose him. The truth has to come out." Agatha leaned forward, her tone calm but firm. "Confrontation rarely works alone. And truth is not always as simple as accusation. You must be careful, Lena. There's more at stake than anger and grief." The girl's lips trembled, betraying both frustration and fear. "I can't trust anyone else." Agatha's attention snapped as her phone buzzed. Bill Wong's name flashed on the screen. She answered quickly, relief and urgency colliding in her chest. "Agatha," Bill said. "He's alive, your vicar, hiding just outside of Netherfield. Thought it best to stay out of sight for now." Agatha's mind raced. Lena was dangerous only in her intent, not her strength. The vicar was alive but vulnerable. She needed to act carefully, to protect all parties while uncovering the truth. She ended the call, turning to Lena with a decisive look. "You're not acting alone anymore. There's a man involved, and he's alive. If we proceed recklessly, someone could get hurt. I need your cooperation and your honesty."
Agatha and Bill navigated the quiet lanes toward Netherfield, the afternoon sun casting long, gentle shadows across hedgerows. The village was small, the cottages neat and silent, yet Agatha's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and caution. Somewhere nearby, the vicar, long absent from Carsley, was waiting, wary of the world that might misconstrue his every step. Bill pulled the car up outside a low-bricked parsonage, ivy curling across its front wall like a protective curtain. "He's here," Bill said. "I spoke briefly. He's cautious, but willing to see you." Agatha nodded, smoothing the creases in her coat. "Then we proceed carefully." They walked up the garden path together. The door opened almost immediately to reveal the vicar himself, slightly disheveled, but with that unmistakable, quiet dignity he always carried. His eyes widened at Agatha's presence, relief and apprehension mixed in equal measure. "Agatha," he said, voice low but warm, "I hoped you'd come." "I hoped to find you safe," Agatha replied. "We need to talk. There's much to untangle." He gestured them inside, the parlor modest but comfortable. A kettle steamed gently on the stove, giving the room a homely warmth that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. "I need you to understand," the vicar began, seating himself in the well-worn armchair. "I did not flee because I feared wrongdoing on my part. I fled because I feared misinterpretation. Lena, her assumptions are intense. She believes I betrayed Mara, but she's mistaken." Agatha listened closely, noting the careful selection of words. "Explain," she said softly. The vicar leaned forward. "Years ago, when Mara ran away, I reported her to the authorities, not to punish her, but because I feared she was being exploited. I had reason to suspect someone outside the village was taking advantage of her desperation. I never imagined she would disappear before help could reach her. I have always suspected someone intervened, someone who acted with the best intentions, but without my knowledge." Bill nodded from his perch nearby. "So her disappearance was never your doing?" "Never," the vicar confirmed. "I have always feared that Lena's conviction of betrayal would lead her to blame me unfairly. I did what I thought was right. I followed the rules and the law. But Mara vanished. I could not stay where the grief and accusation would follow me. I needed space to think, to pray, to wait for clarity."
Agatha's mind began to rearrange the puzzle pieces. Mrs. Blocksby's secrecy, the letter, Lena's anger, they all now carried a different weight. Perhaps Mrs. Blocksby's sin, her defiance of protocol, actually shielded Mara from a danger the vicar could not have anticipated. "You suspect someone else helped her?" Agatha asked, leaning forward, curiosity sharpened. "Yes, I cannot say for certain, but I have always believed that a compassionate hand acted when mine could not. And if that hand belonged to Mrs. Blocksby, then perhaps her secret was not a sin at all, but an act of courage." Agatha allowed herself a small, steadying breath. Relief mingled with the unease that lingered like morning fog. The vicar's sincerity was clear, yet the mystery of Mara's ultimate fate remained unresolved. Lena's expectations, Mrs. Blocksby's guilt, and the missing girl's story continued to intertwine in ways no one had fully grasped. Agatha leaned back, considering. "Then our task is not to accuse, but to understand, to find you, the truth, and perhaps Mara." The vicar nodded gravely. "Yes, that is why I waited, for someone like you, to guide this, to protect all who are innocent and frightened." Agatha met Bill's eyes briefly, then returned to the vicar. "We'll do that, carefully and together." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the gentle warmth of the parsonage offering a fragile comfort. The journey was far from over, but clarity was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Mara's story, once twisted by fear and misunderstanding, was starting to make sense, and the path forward, though delicate, was visible at last.
Chapter 6. A Truth Buried in Kindness. Agatha arrived in Bristol under a pale morning sky, the streets glinting with recent rain. She carried the weight of urgency without letting it crush the careful calm she preferred. Somewhere in this city, the girl once known as Mara, or so everyone had thought, was alive. Agatha's instincts told her this discovery would unravel more than a single mistaken death. It promised to reshape the entire story of Mrs. Blocksby's sin and Lena's frantic accusations. She found the woman in a modest bookshop tucked down a narrow lane. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air, an oddly comforting contrast to the tension she carried. The woman glanced up from a ledger, startled at the sight of a visitor. Agatha introduced herself politely, explaining she was seeking answers regarding a name from long ago. The woman stiffened slightly. "You mean Mara?" she said cautiously, though the name wasn't hers anymore. "I don't use that name anymore." "I understand," Agatha said gently, "but someone is claiming to be your daughter and believes the vicar harmed you. We need clarity, for her and for everyone involved." The woman hesitated, then gestured to the back room. "Very well, but you must know, it's complicated." Inside, she poured them both a cup of tea, the warmth of the mug comforting against Agatha's nerves. "I am very much alive," she said softly. "I left Carsley because of a man who threatened me, not the vicar. He was my boyfriend, controlling and dangerous. Mrs. Blocksby helped me escape, gave me money, directions, and advice. She saved me from him." Agatha nodded, relief flickering through her chest. "So the vicar wasn't involved in your disappearance?" "No. He didn't know where I went, and I made sure no one else could track me. I wanted a fresh start, no debts, no shadows. That is why I never contacted anyone again." Her gaze dropped to her hands, the faintest blush coloring her cheeks. "I was embarrassed, ashamed. I wanted to disappear completely." Agatha studied her quietly. "And Lena?" Her eyes widened. "Lena? I have no daughter. I never had children." A quiet realization settled over Agatha like morning mist. The girl who had terrified Mrs. Blocksby with her letter, who had accused the vicar of betrayal, was misled. Someone had impersonated her mother to manipulate her, to inflame fear and suspicion. The magnitude of the deception was almost too much to comprehend. "Do you know who might have done this?" Agatha asked carefully. She shook her head. "No,
I've had no contact with anyone from Carsley. I left my past behind entirely. Whoever is using my story, they are skilled. They know enough to frighten my former friends and stir trouble." Agatha exhaled, letting some of the tension slip away. Relief washed over her. Mrs. Blocksby had not endangered anyone, the vicar was innocent, and the supposed tragic death was nothing but a fiction. Yet at the same time, a thread of unease remained. The manipulator was still at large, and their intentions were unknown. "Thank you for your honesty," Agatha said. "It clears a great deal up, but we must be careful. Someone is orchestrating fear using your name." The woman nodded, a mixture of worry and acceptance in her expression. "I understand. I only hope they do not harm anyone." Agatha stood, pocketing her notebook. She felt the familiar surge of determination. The pieces were shifting. Clarity was emerging from confusion. Now the task was to trace the manipulator, protect Mrs. Blocksby, and reunite all the threads of a story that had been buried under decades of fear and misinterpretation. Outside the bookshop, the damp Bristol air smelled of possibility. Agatha glanced at the quiet street, aware that the next step, the confrontation with Lena and the discovery of the true instigator, was imminent. The girl who lived had spoken, and with her words the shadow that had haunted Carsley began to lift, leaving only questions that demanded answers.
Back in Carsley, Agatha and Bill began the careful work of untangling Lena's past. It was clear the girl had been manipulated, but by whom? The village lanes seemed quieter than usual as they moved from one hesitant witness to another, piecing together the fragments of a story that had spun out of control over decades. At first, Lena's statements were confusing, a jumble of fear, fury, and misremembered details. But Bill's methodical approach, combined with Agatha's intuitive observations, soon revealed a pattern. Someone had been pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating Lena's actions to serve a selfish purpose. "Look at this," Bill said, holding up a stack of correspondence Lena had unwittingly preserved. Postmarked from several towns over the years, the handwriting was strikingly similar to the letter delivered to Mrs. Blocksby. "This isn't your average angry daughter scenario," he said. "It's too coordinated. Someone is deliberately using her." Agatha examined the notes carefully. The phrasing was oddly formal, each letter ending with affectionate terms, "your loving uncle," though Lena had never mentioned an uncle in her life. "She's been given a figure to trust," Agatha murmured, "a supposed family member she believes she can rely on, but it's all fabricated." A few calls later, and they confirmed their suspicion. The man in question was the same dangerous boyfriend who had once trapped Mara. He had resurfaced under a new identity, portraying himself as Lena's guardian and benefactor. His goal had been simple yet cruel: locate Mara under the pretense of family concern, then regain control over someone he had once dominated. Agatha felt a chill. Every misinterpreted interaction, every forged letter, suddenly aligned with his sinister logic. Lena's anger, her accusations, her determination to find the vicar, they were all part of his design. "She's a pawn," Agatha said softly, as she watched Lena from a distance, as she fretted over her next move. "Not the enemy." Bill nodded. "And now we understand why Mrs. Blocksby and the vicar were caught in this mess. They were targeted indirectly through fear and deception." Agatha's mind raced. The implications were enormous. Lena, though impassioned and sincere, had been used to provoke confrontation and reveal the whereabouts of Mara, or, at least, the woman once known by that name. Mrs. Blocksby's hidden guilt now appeared almost heroic. Her secret actions had shielded Mara from immediate danger, and had she acted differently, the manipulator might have succeeded years ago. They moved quickly, cross-referencing addresses and sightings with Lena's recent travels.
Each confirmation tightened the circle, bringing them closer to the puppeteer's location. Agatha felt a careful satisfaction. This was the moment when investigation met clarity, when empathy and persistence outmatched deception. She paused by the village green, thinking of Mrs. Blocksby's worried face, of the letter that had sparked months of unease. "We have to act fast," Agatha said. "Lena's about to realize the truth, and she needs protection as much as Mara. If he senses we've figured him out, he could try something desperate." Bill adjusted his coat. "We'll make sure no one gets hurt, and once he's caught, we can untangle every lie he's spun over the years." Agatha nodded. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the rooftops, lending the village an almost peaceful veneer that belied the tension beneath. But she felt ready to confront the puppeteer, ready to protect Lena and Mrs. Blocksby, and finally ready to ensure that long-buried truths came fully into the light. For the first time since the letter arrived, the pieces of the puzzle were in her hands. The manipulator's game was clear, and now Agatha could move decisively. Lena was not the villain, she was the tool, and the tool needed guidance, compassion, and careful extraction before the puppeteer struck again.
Chapter 7. The Reckoning in Carsley. Agatha guided Lena down the familiar path to the Carsley vicarage, the afternoon sunlight warming the stone walls and flower-bordered garden. Lena's steps were hesitant, her hands twisting the hem of her coat, as if holding on to courage by sheer force. Agatha walked beside her with a calm steadiness, sensing that the next hour would require delicate care more than authority. Mrs. Blocksby met them at the door, her expression a blend of relief, concern, and lingering apprehension. She opened her arms briefly, and Lena, still tense, allowed herself a small, uncertain hug. "Welcome back," Mrs. Blocksby said softly, voice carrying decades of gentle reassurance. "I know there has been confusion and fear, but I promise it can be explained." Lena's eyes flicked between Mrs. Blocksby and Agatha. Her earlier fury and mistrust still lingered, but the warmth of the vicarage, familiar and unthreatening, began to seep into her nerves. Agatha motioned for her to sit at the small parlor table, sunlight streaming over the polished wood, and poured cups of tea. The mundane comfort of steam curling from the mugs seemed almost magical in its ability to soothe the tension. "Lena," Agatha began, her voice gentle, "you've been working with pieces of a story that isn't entirely accurate. There's truth in your fear, but some assumptions have led you astray. We need to set the record straight." Lena stiffened, but her curiosity overcame the last traces of resistance. I need to know," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I have to understand why everything happened the way it did." Mrs. Blocksby took a seat across from her, hands folded neatly. "Years ago, I helped a young woman leave Carsley because she was in danger. I acted in secret because I feared exposure would worsen her situation. It was never meant to harm anyone, and certainly not the vicar." Lena's eyes widened. You saved her?" The revelation cut through the layers of accusation and fear. Her trembling hands betrayed a mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby confirmed, voice steady despite the lingering worry in her eyes. "And she is alive, living safely in another city, unaware of the turmoil her absence has caused here. The letters you received were forged to mislead you. Someone used your concern to manipulate events." Agatha produced a small folder of letters and photographs, showing Lena the proof of the woman's well-being. Lena's gaze flicked from image to image, each softening her previously rigid posture. A faint exhale escaped her lips as the reality settled in. I had no idea," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. Tears threatened, though gratitude and relief began to edge out the shock. "I thought I was defending her, but I've been fighting shadows."
Mrs. Blocksby reached forward, placing a reassuring hand on Lena's. "You acted from a place of love and concern. That is never wrong, even if the path was misleading. Now you understand the truth, and we can begin to heal what's been frayed." Agatha smiled subtly, noticing Lena's shoulders relax, her eyes losing the sharp edge of suspicion. "The important part is that we move forward with knowledge rather than fear. You see now that no one here intended harm, and the person you feared for so long is actually your ally." The room felt lighter, warmer, and calmer than it had in weeks. Lena's gratitude blossomed, her earlier fury replaced with a mixture of awe and relief. The vicarage, with its familiar furniture and gentle sunlight, seemed almost to embrace them all. Agatha knew this calm would not last indefinitely. The true confrontation with the manipulator still awaited, but for now the first step had been achieved: understanding, empathy, and reconciliation. As Lena sipped her tea, the tight knot of anxiety that had haunted her began to loosen. The atmosphere was tender, soothing, and remarkably ordinary in its comfort, a stark contrast to the danger and deceit that had brought her here. The pieces of a long-hidden puzzle were finally beginning to fit together, readying everyone for the challenges that lay ahead.
Late that afternoon, a sharp knock rattled the vicarage door. Lena froze, her hands tightening around her teacup. Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill Wong, who had been quietly observing the room, ready for any unforeseen trouble. "I'll get it," Mrs. Blocksby said, her voice steady but tinged with anticipation. She opened the door to reveal a man in his late 40s, his posture defensive, eyes darting nervously. He carried himself as if expecting confrontation, and he had arrived precisely when Agatha had hoped. "May I help you?" Mrs. Blocksby asked, keeping her tone calm yet authoritative. The man's gaze flicked to Lena, and for a moment anger and desperation mingled in his expression. "Lena, we need to talk now. You don't understand what I've been trying to protect." Agatha stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "You've been manipulating her. You forged letters, spun false stories, and put innocent people at risk. It ends here." Bill Wong emerged from the side hallway, subtly closing the distance and revealing the presence of law enforcement. "Step aside, sir," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "You're coming with us." The man's face shifted from defiance to panic as he realized the trap had closed. He glanced at Lena, trying to appeal to her loyalty, but her expression was a mixture of betrayal and dawning clarity. "I only wanted to find her," he blurted. "I thought I was helping her reconnect. She's mine to protect." "You've done nothing but harm," Agatha said softly, but without compromise. "Your protection was false. You've been controlling her through fear and deceit." He swore under his breath, and for a tense moment it seemed he might attempt flight. Bill's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a reminder of the consequences awaiting any rash movement. The man sagged, realizing escape was impossible. "Yes," he admitted finally, voice raw, "I forged the letters. I manipulated Lena. I thought it would force her to act, to locate her mother, but I misjudged everything. I never expected her to confront the truth so quickly." Agatha nodded, the satisfaction of understanding mingled with lingering concern. "You used someone else's love and trust as a weapon. That ends now. Lena is safe, and the woman you tried to expose lives peacefully, thanks in no small part to Mrs. Blocksby's courage years ago." Mrs. Blocksby exhaled, a slow, almost imperceptible release of decades of tension. "So my unforgivable sin, it wasn't a sin at all. It was an act of protection, an act of kindness." Lena's eyes filled with tears, not of fear or anger, but of understanding and gratitude. She reached out, gently taking Mrs. Blocksby's hand. "You saved someone's life, and I finally see what that really means." Bill guided the manipulator toward his car, the situation controlled but charged with quiet justice.
Agatha watched the exchange, her mind noting the subtle shifts in the room, relief settling over Mrs. Blocksby, Lena's gratitude, and the vicar's calm return to normalcy. The tension that had lingered in the vicarage for weeks, an invisible weight pressing on everyone, now eased. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. The threads of deception had been severed, and the lives of the innocent restored. Carsley once again felt like the warm, watchful village she loved, where mysteries could be unraveled without losing the humanity at their heart. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the sky with gentle golds and pinks, Agatha realized that courage, empathy, and careful reasoning had won the day. The villain was unmasked, the truth secured, and a long-hidden peace was finally at reach. Mrs. Blocksby's heart, long burdened by secrecy, could finally rest.
Chapter 8. Grace, Forgiveness, and Mulled Wine. The village of Carsley awoke to its usual quiet charm the morning after the manipulator's arrest. Birds sang lazily from the hedgerows, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery, mingling with the crisp autumn air. Despite the undercurrent of recent events, life had a way of resuming its gentle rhythm, and the village embraced it as if nothing had ever disrupted the familiar cadence. Agatha strolled toward the vicarage, a small satchel of freshly baked scones in hand. She found Mrs. Blocksby in the garden, tending to the chrysanthemums she had nurtured for years. The older woman looked up, her expression a mixture of relief and residual worry, and smiled faintly. Agatha set the scone basket down, brushing imaginary crumbs from her hands. "You've done more than I could ever have hoped for," Mrs. Blocksby said quietly. "I was terrified the village would see only my mistakes, not the choices I made to protect someone." Agatha shook her head. "They'll understand, eventually. Courage, compassion, and careful judgment are rarely unnoticed here, even if it takes time for the story to spread properly. And besides," she added with a small conspiratorial smile, "you had a very good friend in me to ensure the truth came out." The vicar appeared in the doorway, carrying a small stack of hymn books. His usual calm demeanor was softened by subtle signs of lingering guilt. "I misjudged, I suppose," he said, voice warm but repentant. "I should have trusted you, my dear, and not allowed misunderstanding to grow." Mrs. Blocksby's hands tightened slightly over her gardening gloves, but she met his gaze with steady eyes. "And yet, we've all learned something," she said. "Fear and secrecy can twist even the best intentions, but courage, when it shows itself, mends more than it harms." Lena arrived shortly after, stepping into the sunlight with a tentative smile. She carried only a small satchel, her posture both cautious and liberated. "Thank you," she said, addressing Agatha first, then turning to Mrs. Blocksby, "for everything, for showing me the truth, and for keeping her safe all these years." The women share the quiet moment, an unspoken understanding passing among them. Agatha's presence had bridged decades of misunderstanding, untangling fear and misinformation with both tact and intuition. Lena's eyes glistened, gratitude mingling with relief, as if she had been carrying a burden she hadn't fully realized until now. Even the village seemed to breathe easier. Neighbors exchanged polite greetings with newfound warmth, rumors tempered by the clarity of truth. Carsley's streets, lanes, and hedgerows once again felt safe, familiar, and infused with the soft glow of normalcy. The faint aroma of mulled wine from the vicarage kitchen hinted at the evening's quiet celebration, a modest gesture of comfort and restoration, welcoming all back into a world where fear no longer lingered at the edges. Agatha lingered at the garden gate, her gaze sweeping the village she had grown to love. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across rooftops and cobblestones. She allowed herself a small, private smile, savoring the calm that had been so hard-earned. Yet even in the comfort of restored peace, her mind clung to a detail from recent events, a small anomaly she hadn't yet fully understood, a thread that might require gentle attention in the days to come. For now, however, warmth and relief reigned. Courage had triumphed over fear, compassion over suspicion, and the village, like the women within it,
could finally settle into the comforting rhythm of ordinary life. Agatha straightened her coat, inhaled deeply, and stepped toward the vicarage doorway. Inside, laughter mingled with the rich scent of spiced wine, a gentle reminder that even the most tangled mysteries could resolve into moments of grace, forgiveness, and human connection.
Night had fallen over Carsley, wrapping the village in a soft, velvety darkness pierced by the occasional glow of lanterns and cottage windows. Agatha settled into her favorite armchair, the familiar cushions welcoming her with comforting familiarity. A cup of mulled wine steamed gently in her hands, its spicy aroma mingling with the faint scent of winter hearths drifting through her open window. She allowed herself a long, slow breath, savoring the rare moment of peace after the whirlwind of recent events. The day's resolution played in her mind like a well-loved melody. Mrs. Blocksby had been vindicated, the vicar's reputation intact, Lena safe and relieved, and the manipulator brought to justice without lasting harm. Carsley itself seemed to hum with satisfaction, the rhythm of daily life restored. Agatha couldn't help but smile at how neatly courage, patience, and careful observation had unraveled a tangled web of decades-old deceit. Yet her thoughts wandered beyond the case to the deeper connections forged along the way. She considered Mrs. Blocksby, who had carried years of secret worry with quiet dignity, risking public opinion to do what she felt was right. Agatha's admiration for her friend had grown immeasurably. In that reflection, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine, gratitude for companionship, for trust, and for the resilience of human kindness in a world often shadowed by misunderstanding. Her gaze drifted to the small side table where she had left the letter and a few personal items from the vicarage. Among them, she noticed a petite locked box that Mrs. Blocksby had quietly placed aside earlier in the day. Curiosity piqued. Agatha picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It was unassuming, ordinary in appearance, yet its presence was heavy with intention. She tried the clasp. It resisted. But even the act of holding it stirred a sense of wonder. For a moment, Agatha allowed herself the thrill of mystery in its simplest form. She knew that not all secrets were dangerous, some were merely sentimental, relics of past choices and private moments. The box symbolized that truth, that even when larger puzzles were solved, life offered subtle enigmas to discover, cherish, or protect. It reminded her that curiosity and care could coexist, that solving a case did not always mean the story was entirely over. Sipping her wine, Agatha reflected on how the day had changed her understanding of courage, empathy, and trust. She realized that every case, no matter how fraught, carried lessons not just for the mind, but for the heart. Mrs. Blocksby's actions, Lena's journey, and even the manipulator's exposure had underscored the delicate balance of human motives, how fear, love, and protection could intertwine in ways both predictable and surprising. The mulled wine warmed her further, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. There was satisfaction here, yes, but also anticipation. Carsley was a village alive with quiet intrigue, and she knew, as she always did, that the next puzzle was only a few steps away. The locked box sat beside her like a gentle whisper. Some stories linger, and some mysteries wait patiently for the right moment. Agatha set her cup down and leaned back, letting the comfortable silence envelop her. Outside, the night was still, the village resting under its familiar stars. Yet in her mind, the gears of curiosity were turning, quietly, steadily. She had faced deceit, fear, and accusation, and had emerged with insight, friendship, and renewed courage. With a final glance at the box, Agatha allowed herself a small, private laugh. Whatever the future might bring, she was ready.
Carsley was alive with stories yet untold, and she, ever vigilant and ever curious, would meet them, as she always did, with wit, warmth, and the gentle certainty that even the most tangled secrets could one day be understood.